So let's start bringing in some of our objects into Stingray. So we're going to be spending a lot of time in this section of the interface in this part because we're going to be working with the asset browser. We're going to be bringing in our folders and objects and things like that. So just to remind you of what's going on over here, this is the asset browser, and this is where we see and navigate all of the subdirectories of our projects. We have a familiar looking scene type explorer here. We have our asset window where we can see what's selected. We can adjust this slider to change the size and visibility of all of our asset folders. And we can import objects directly here. We can just click the import button. I actually prefer to do a lot of right-click type of operations. So we're going to be using the right-click to bring in our objects and create our directory structure. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into our content folder. We're going to be adding some props. So let's go into models and props. And you can see that I have a lot of folders in here. I'm being very deliberate about my structure. I'm trying to stay organized. So even though we have some things in here, let's go ahead and create a new folder so that we can actually go through the import process. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say create folder. And we'll just give this folder a name. We'll just call this the new sofa. And we'll say OK to that. And the new sofa folder is created. I'll go into the new sofa folder, and now I'm ready to bring the asset into here. So I'll right click again and say import asset. And this will allow me to navigate to wherever my sofa is located. So we'll just go ahead and bring in the sofa object. Now, when you bring in an object into Stingray, you get this FBX import dialog box. Much like the export dialog box in 3ds Max, it's important to make sure that you have the right things checked here. For the most part, you can leave everything as is, but there is one thing that you really want to make sure that you don't have checked when you're importing static objects. You want to make sure that animation and skeleton are unchecked, because if they are checked and your object is static, it will still create some support files to support any animation that would be on that, and we just don't need that right now. So you want to make sure that that is off. You want to make sure that textures is on. It'll automatically create a textures folder for you, so we'll just go ahead and say import. Now, whenever you import something into Stingray, it's really important to understand what's going on. And so now you can see all of the resources that this object has brought into the scene from the FBX file. But before we put it in the scene, I want to show you something specific that happened pretty quickly and you might have missed it. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that entire asset out of the scene. I'm going to re-import it. Now this time, instead of just watching the import process, I want you to watch the lower right-hand portion of my screen. You're going to see something that happens pretty quickly, but it's really important. And that is called a data compile. So I'm going to right-click. I'm going to say import asset. And I'm going to go to my Game Readies folder, and we'll pull up the sofa object again. And here's our FBX import dialog, which is just fine. Now watch the lower right-hand portion of the screen. All right, it happened pretty quickly there, but that was a really important process. What happens when you bring in an FBX file is it compiles all of that data that it has separated out from the FBX file and basically hooks it all up and gives you an object that you can now put in your scene. Some objects take longer to compile than others. You want to make sure that you wait until that process is over before you go ahead and put your object into your scene. Okay, so now we're ready to actually place the sofa into the scene. A couple of ways I can do that. Super simple. I can just select the object here in the asset browser and just drag it right into the scene. And that allows me to place one object into the scene. Alternatively, I can select the object in the asset browser and use my place command. And this automatically gives me the opportunity to place multiple objects all within one placement session. So since I'm only placing one object here, I'm really just going to drag it from the asset browser. But if you're going to be adding a lot of things, like maybe you're doing an architectural exterior scene and you're dropping down a lot of park benches or garbage cans or different plants or things like that, the place tool may actually be the better option for you. So we'll go ahead and just move some things around. I'm going to, using my W, E, and R key, I'm going to rotate this and begin to position it a little bit and get it in our scene. You may want to consider using the transform dialog box over here on the right-hand side of the screen in the property editor tab So I'll just go ahead and type in 90 degrees for rotation. That way I know that my object is placed properly. Okay, now we can begin to place other objects. So let's go ahead and place the cafe table. I've already imported the object, so we'll just drag it into the scene over here. And let's bring in some other things. How about the stools? Place those over there. Now, I have multiple stools that I want to have in my scene here. There's a quick and easy way to take advantage of that as well. If I hold down my Shift key and just drag in one axis, I'll automatically make a copy of that. So if I have multiple objects that I want to have in the scene and I don't necessarily need to use the place tool, I can just hold down my Shift key and drag them that way. That's one way to place those objects there. And I'll rotate them around. That's great. Now, just remember a couple of other things, and that is that when you are placing objects into your level in Stingray, that they place in a fashion that's similar to the Select and Place tool in 3ds Max. So, for example, if I want to put the radio on top of the table, all I have to do is bring the asset into the scene, and you'll notice that right now it's kind of hovering on the floor, but if I move my asset over the top of the table, notice it sits right on top of the table, and I don't even have to change my perspective to get that to be in the right spot. And then I can just adjust the position that way. Finally, the last thing you probably want to try and take advantage of when you're placing objects are using your grids and snaps. If I turn on my grid and snap, you can see I'm snapping to a grid. I'm doing a custom grid. I could adjust my grid settings to be 1 meter, half a meter, 1/10 of a meter, and so on. So it's really easy to customize your snaps for object placement anytime you want to. Now, what about deleting objects? Deleting objects is really simple, but you do need to be aware of a couple of things. One, just because you delete an object from your level does not mean that it is deleted from the project. If we go back into props here, I can see that the radio object is still in my project, and that's okay. I might not just want it in this particular scene, but if you really want to get rid of an object, you want to delete it from the asset browser. And that leads me to my final point about object management in Stingray, and that is, if you are going to be deleting things from your project, you want to be doing those deletions from the asset browser. You don't want to go into the File Explorer and delete all of those things. Because when you delete things from the asset browser, the project directory structure is updated within Stingray. If you're to delete it from the File Explorer window, those changes don't get propagated through the rest of the project. So you really want to do all of your file management directly within Stingray. So by using the placement tools and snap setting and alignment, you should now be able to effectively place objects within your scene and start building out your Stingray levels.